Hi everyone, this is Lien and I'm glad that you are joining me today in this video. I'm going to show you how I created this card using the Whale digital stamp by Rachelle and Miller. Now, when you buy this stamp, you get a black version and a no-line coloring version. So I printed them out, both the same size, onto this piece of paper, and today I'm going to use the no-line version to color in with you. Now I'm going to use my Copic markers and I will show you all the caps that I'm using every time and just how I build up this image. Now let's make this clear, I have sped this video quite a bit, the coloring, so just take your time if you're starting on these images. Definitely with the no-line coloring, I love the end result, but it takes a bit more time for me personally to color that in, since you have to be a bit more careful to really capture all those details. Now I'm first going to color this whole image using my Copic markers, and then afterwards I actually decided to use some pencils as well, and I have some Polychromos pencils from Faber-Castell at home. Now before you start buying pencils, because you want to add some details as well, just try those pencils that you have at home and maybe they are just perfect. You don't necessarily need to invest in a whole bunch of pencils. Okay, so for the Copic coloring now. This whale is going to be blue, as you can see here, and it's quite a large image. So in the beginning, when I do Copic coloring, I always go from darkest to lightest, and in this case, or most of the time when I have a bigger image, I have a lack of Copic markers, of the amount of Copic markers. But no worries, when I start shadowing in the beginning, I also keep it really soft, and I don't tend to add big shadows from the start. So I keep that to minimum the first time around. Now, as soon as I have an idea on how much space I have with the image, having added all those other colors as well, then I tend to go a bit broader with the shadows. It's always easier to add more of the darker color than to have to get rid of the dark color. So that's why I start really light and with tiny shadows, and then I make it a bit broader and go a bit wider with all of them. Also, this image, I wanted to start with this one, creating my first video for Rachelle and Miller, because this is my personal favorite so far. Of course, she keeps creating, so maybe my favorite will change in the future, but so far, if you ask me, this whale stamp and also the whale with the little girl is just fabulous. I love it. So I thought it was appropriate to use this digital stamp for my first video and my first card as part of the design team. So now onto a bit more of those shadows. As I said, I'm going to add more of that darker color. Also, maybe handy to know, I'm using the Translotype Perfect coloring paper. This is a paper that I find really handy to use for alcohol markers, because it allows you to add lots and lots of layers without the bleeding that you from time to time can have with some papers. Also handy about this paper is that it isn't as thick. I don't have a fancy printer, I just have an inkjet printer, so I don't have a laser one, so that's also handy to know, I think. So it's just a regular one, and it cannot really handle really thick paper. So for example, Nina 110 is an issue. I cannot print on that paper with my printer. About digital stamps, it's that kind of stamp that I avoided really long, but then again, Rachelle and Miller, we make the exception for this amazing illustrator. So I thought that I didn't have the right printer to do digital stamps. Now, then someone asked me to try it out, and I did. And I must admit, if you want to use your alcohol markers and you just have an inkjet printer, I'm sorry, then you probably can. There are some exceptions, but I don't know them all. But my printer is just a really simple printer and it works. Of course, if you want to do some watercoloring and those things, then your ink will start bleeding. Another thing as well, with the no-line coloring version of a lot of digital stamps, well, chances that you will see bleeding of your ink while coloring with several mediums is just smaller, so that's also handy to know. So just if you have a laser printer, then normally you're good for all of it, for every medium, normally. If you have an inkjet printer like I do, then for alcohol markers, chances are high that you can enjoy digital stamps, in case you were wondering. So I'm already onto the little or the tinier images of this digital stamp, and well, then it gets a bit harder to color it in. I must be honest, I'm not an expert. I just tend to do what I like, so Copic coloring in this case, but the tinier the images or the parts of the images, the harder it gets to really add that detailing as well as just keeping it inside the lines. Then again, later on I will be using those pencils, and that will really help me to get a bit more dimension going on. It isn't necessary, but from time to time I really like adding a bit of those pencils. Another thing about this paper, the Translucite Perfect coloring paper, is that I notice personally that the blend of my markers is best when I have at least 2 layers. So you will see me on each part adding several layers. That's my personal preference to get that blending going on, as well as the end result that I like the most. Now, about this background and the sea, it's all included in this digital stamp, which is lovely. But personally, I am not really good in coloring a whole scene with Copic markers. It's not my forte. I prefer having my images colored in and then using distress inks to create my background. Now I tried to do this sea with some BGs, and well, it worked, and at the same time I wasn't really happy with it, so I just went for it, but then you will see me use some distress inks later on to smoothen it a bit more. But anything works as long as you're having fun. It might be that you are wonderful with your Copic markers and that you can create the most gorgeous scenes, then definitely do that. If you're like me and you're struggling a bit with getting that scene in the back of the card or anything like that, and you prefer distress inks or other inks to do some ink blending for your background, then there is a tip. So I'm doing this for the first time, digital stamps and backgrounds and all those things. I have done some digital stamps before, but keeping the background really simple. Here you have the sea, the sky, really gorgeous. So what did I do? Before I got rid of the word where I added these images onto, I also printed this image the same size onto masking paper. Really handy, because then you can really fussy cut your image out, making sure that you cover your image, and then you can blend around the image. And that's something that I personally think that I will do a lot, except for the clean and simple cards that I will create in the future, and where I prefer leaving my background completely white. But in this case, having that sea already drawn there, I just thought that it was a good idea to have a backup plan if the sea wasn't turning out as I wanted to, which is personally what I experienced here. It's not the result that I wanted to have, so we will figure out a way around it. And actually with with the masking paper, it's something that I just now already have in my mind. I will do it every time that I will print out one of these digital stamps. Not necessarily maybe, but just in case. Here as well, as I said before, doing that second layer to get that blend that I want, and if needed, I can add many more layers on top of this paper. Something that I really like about the illustrations by Rachelle Miller is that she has those curly edges and that sketchy look and all those soft and cheerful details, and that were actually the items that convinced me of using pencils. Now, from time to time, when you want to add details, you can be really shaky. For me, I have half of the time no issues with doing details, and the other half of the time I'm really shaky and I can't do that. So here, after coloring everything in, I was really scared that I would mess up just adding the details. And I also have like micron fine liners and a Copic multiliner, if I'm not wrong. But the sizes that I have are quite thick, so that was also something that worried me, because this image is, well, it's large enough, but at the same time it's really precious and tiny, you know. So to avoid that, the pencils also came into place, and they have a really sharp tip if you sharpen them really well. So that was also something that helped me getting those details there. To create a card, I used some basic rectangles to cut out an A2 sized panel, and then I was going to do the ink blending for the sky. Now, first of all, I thought that the sky was the only part that I was going to ink blend, so I cut my mask perfectly for covering the image as well as the sea. Now, as I wasn't really happy with the sea completely, this mask wasn't really that well for doing the sea part again, but we figured out a way around it. So for the sky, I'm using tumbled glass distress ink. I really like using distress inks to do ink blending. There are also distress oxide inks. If you aren't familiar with ink blending, then those inks are really forgiving. This ink is a bit harder to wiggle around, but I just like the brightness of these inks. So I went around the edges and just above the image, and I checked whether I liked it. Now, I must be honest, I wasn't really a fan of all the white space that I had there. Also the stars, you can do a really dark card if you want to and have like the night sky. But I wanted to make a really soft baby card, so that's why I decided to just keep it really soft and light even when there are stars. So here you can already see I wasn't really happy with that sea going on there. I used the same markers to ink blend to add the color from the edges so that everything was covered with this color, but then I decided to take my distress ink, Crack Pistachio, my favorite distress ink, and really softly go over that sea, and actually it smoothed it a bit out, which I really like. It didn't have to take away all the lines of the markers, because a sea isn't perfect and it's not even. There are different lines in the sea if you're watching at the sea. So I didn't want it to be completely gone, but I am glad that I used the distress ink to soften it. So here I have taken my Polychromos pencils. I will be listing the Copic markers that I used and the pencils down below in the description box, just so you have a reference if you like these combinations. The second eye that I did here was really bad. I did it the other way around, so it looked horrible. I just used an eraser and fixed it. And now I'm going to add all those other details that are already there but are barely visible because this is the no-line coloring version. But I so love them, and while I was doing them I was tempted and I started adding a bit more shadow using this pencil as well. And then once you get going, it's hard to stop sometimes, so I just went for it all the way, adding more of this darker color. Then I looked for a bit of a mid-tone and a lighter color to blend it all out. Just like the idea with the markers, I used my pencils. I'm not a coloring expert and definitely not with pencils, but from time to time I use it to create this extra depth. And also it helps if you want to go into those tiny details in between the legs or the fingers of images, depending on what you're coloring. It gives you some possibilities. So here I am trying to blend that out a bit more towards the lighter colors of Copic markers that I used. And I just kept going until a certain point that I told myself to stop. You know, at a certain point we need to tell ourselves that it's enough, because I truly think that if we want to, we can keep going, keep adding colors, keep adding details and all those things. And from time to time I really truly get lost in the process, but I think I managed it well for this card. So here I have that micron fine liner that I have, and I just added it to the eye. And then I decided, in the original image there is like a little white dot in the eye, so that's a lovely detail that I wanted to add, but it was still too wet, so I did it afterwards. Also really handy was that I had that black version and I colored in the no-line version, but that black version was right beside me, so I could really see those details that were intended by Rachelle Anna Miller. So that was handy to know. And then, well, here, as I said, those tiny places, sometimes it's hard to get those details in there with your markers because they are thicker. So if you have pencils, maybe that can help if you're not sure about those tinier images or parts of your image. So I'm just slowly finishing this image, and once I am done with the little boy, I'm going to stop coloring, you know, and then I will add a little sentiment. I love this image and I think that you can perfectly keep it like this, but I wanted to use it as a baby card. And just to help me, I have this tiny sentiment that I got from a Pretty Pink Posh set called Baby. It's a boy and it's subtle, but it's on there, and I think it matches really well with the design of this digital stamp. I'm just adding this panel to a card base, and then this card is completely finished. So this is my first card for you all and my first video. I truly hope that you enjoyed watching and of course that you like the end result. If you did, you can always give this one a thumbs up. I would truly appreciate it. I hope to see you back here on this channel, so definitely subscribe if you don't want to miss any inspiration, and I wish you all a fabulous day. Bye!